The whimper in the barn. The cold came vicious that Thanksgiving morning, the kind that turned breath to ice and made a man question if dawn would ever come. Frank Jerry crossed the frozen yard at 4:05, lantern swinging in his right hand, boots crunching through snow that hadn't been there when he went to bed. 5 years he'd made this walk alone. 5 years since he'd buried his wife and the son she died bringing into the world. The barn should be empty. But something whimpered in the dark. Frank froze. The sound came again, thin, desperate, barely human. He raised the lantern high, light cutting through shadows. There, pressed into the corner where he kept the winter feed, something shifted in the hay. A woman, young, maybe 22, clothes torn and filthy. She clutched a baby to her chest, both wrapped in a horse blanket that wouldn't keep a dog warm. Her eyes snapped open, wild, terrified. "Please." Her voice shattered on the word. "Please don't. Just till morning. We'll be gone. I swear we'll be gone." The baby cried, weak, fading. Frank's lantern light caught the child's face, lips tinged blue, skin like wax. Another hour and they're dead. He saw them then, his wife's last breath, the son he never got to hold, the house that had felt like a graveyard ever since. Frank knelt slow, set the lantern in the hay. The woman pulled back, every muscle coiled to fight. "You're not going anywhere," he said. She stared at him, shaking, disbelieving. Frank stood, turned toward the house. "Can you stand?" She nodded, tried to rise, failed. Frank reached down, not for her, for the baby. The woman's arms locked tight. Then, slowly, she let go. The child settled against his chest with a broken little sigh. "Come on," Frank said. "There's coffee inside." He walked toward the house, heard her stumbling behind him through the snow. The barn door swung shut. Ahead, lamplight glowed in his kitchen window, warm as salvation. The stove was still hot when they came through the door. Frank settled the baby in the crook of his left arm, used his right to pour milk into a pan. The woman stood by the door, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Sit," Frank said, nodding at the table. She moved like something hunted, but she sat. Frank warmed the milk, poured coffee, cut thick slices from yesterday's bread. He'd made jam last fall, more than one man would ever need. He set everything on the table, the milk he tested against the inside of his wrist, then offered to the woman. "What's your name?" "Juliet." She took the bottle with trembling hands. "Baby's Charlotte." She fed Charlotte first, held the bottle steady even though her whole body shook. Frank watched, recognized what he was seeing. A mother. Someone who'd sacrifice everything, warmth, food, safety, for her child. He pushed the bread closer. "Eat." "I'm not... Eat." Juliet picked up the bread with her free hand. She ate like someone who'd forgotten what full felt like. Frank poured more coffee. Didn't ask questions. Questions could wait. He'd set one plate that morning. One cup. Same as every Thanksgiving for 5 years. Now there were 3 people at his table. And the house felt different. Less like a tomb. More like something that could breathe again. Charlotte finished the milk, eyes drifting closed. Juliet held her close, rocking without knowing she did it. "There's a guest room upstairs," Frank said. "Stove's in there too. I'll get it going. You'll stay as long as you need." Juliet's eyes filled with tears. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Frank met her gaze, saw everything she wasn't saying. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a trick. "Then you'll stay." 3 words, simple as that. But they changed everything. The house that hasn't laughed in years. Dawn came slow and gray. Frank woke to the sound of Charlotte whimpering upstairs. He'd given Juliet his late wife's room. Hadn't opened that door in 5 years. But last night he'd lit the stove, changed the sheets, left a lamp burning low. Now he stood at the kitchen stove, cracking eggs into a pan. His hands remembered the motions. Breakfast for 2. For 3, counting Charlotte. The stairs creaked. Juliet appeared in the doorway, Charlotte against her shoulder. She looked worse in daylight, hollow-eyed, bruised, scared. "Sit," Frank said. She sat. He put eggs in front of her, toast, more coffee. Juliet stared at the plate like it might disappear. "Eat." She picked up the fork, took one bite, then another. Then she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face while she ate like someone starving. Frank turned back to the stove, gave her privacy. Charlotte fussed. Frank crossed the kitchen, held out his arms. Juliet hesitated, then passed her over. The baby settled against his chest, stopped crying, just breathed. Frank walked to the window, rocking slow. Outside, snow fell soft and steady. Charlotte's breathing evened out, deepened. Behind him, Juliet's fork clattered to the plate. "I thought we'd die in that barn." Her voice broke. "I was ready for it. I wanted her to be warm one last time." Frank didn't turn around, kept rocking, kept watching the snow. "How long you been running?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. I lost count. Frank's jaw tightened. 3 weeks in November, with a baby. "Anyone looking for you?" "No." Bitter. Final. "No one cares where I am." Charlotte sighed in her sleep. Frank felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd locked away 5 years ago. "The room upstairs," he said quietly. "It was my wife's. She'd want you to have it, long as you need." Juliet's breath caught. "I don't have anywhere else to—" "Then stay." The words hung between them, simple, irrevocable. Juliet wiped her eyes, nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Frank finally turned, met her gaze. "You're safe here, both of you." That night, Frank stood outside the guest room door, heard Juliet crying softly. Not loud, not desperate, just the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who'd finally stopped running. He almost knocked, almost offered comfort. Instead, he went downstairs, made coffee he wouldn't drink, sat at the table where 3 plates still waited to be washed. The house felt different, less like a tomb, more like something that could heal. The truth in the quiet moments. 3 days passed like careful breaths. Juliet moved through the house like a ghost, helping with dishes, folding laundry, always watching the doors, always ready to run. Frank gave her space, asked no questions, just made sure there was coffee in the morning and soup at night. On the 4th evening, Charlotte slept in the cradle Frank had brought down from the attic. The fire crackled low. Juliet sat curled in the armchair, staring at the flames. "His name was Thomas," she said suddenly. Frank looked up from his book. "Charlotte's father." Her voice was flat, dead. "He seemed kind at first. Then I got pregnant." Frank set the book down, didn't speak. "He hit me when I told him." She touched her ribs absently. "Said I'd trapped him. When I refused to get rid of her. He hit me harder." The fire popped. Charlotte stirred but didn't wake. "My parents said it was my fault, that I'd shamed them. They threw me out when I was 7 months along." Frank's hands curled into fists. "I gave birth in a shed behind someone's farm. Alone. In the cold." Her voice cracked. "Charlotte almost died that night. I almost let her. But you didn't." "No." Juliet wiped her eyes. I wrapped her in my coat and started walking. Been walking ever since. Barns, abandoned shacks, anywhere with a roof. She looked at him then, eyes hollow. I was going to die in your barn, Frank. I'd accepted it. I just wanted her warm first. Frank crossed the room, knelt in front of her chair. No one's going to hurt you again, he said quietly. Not him, not your parents, no one. Juliet's breath hitched. You can't promise that. I can, and I do. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, found only truth. I want to believe you, she whispered. Frank took her hand, held it gently. Then start there. Outside, wind howled against the windows. Inside, the fire burned warm. And for the first time in months, Juliet let herself hope. Frank rode into town on Saturday, needed flour, coffee, milk for Charlotte. Things a man living alone never bought. The general store went quiet when he walked in. Mrs. Patterson, the shopkeeper's wife, smiled too wide. Frank, Jerry, haven't seen you in weeks. Been busy. So I heard. Her eyes gleamed. Heard you had company for Thanksgiving. Frank set coins on the counter, said nothing, but the whispers followed him out, voices that thought they were quiet enough. A young woman? Unmarried, from what I hear. And a baby. Frank climbed onto his horse, rode home through cold that felt colder than before. Sunday afternoon, a wagon rolled up the drive. Juliet froze at the window. Someone's coming. Frank opened the door before they knocked. Pastor's wife, Mrs. Brennan, stood on his porch holding a basket. Frank, sweet as honey, brought some preserves. Thought your guest might need them. Her eyes swept past him, found Juliet standing by the stove, Charlotte in her arms. How kind of you to help this poor girl, Mrs. Brennan said, stepping inside uninvited. Tell me, dear, where did you say you were from? Juliet's knuckles went white. I didn't. And the baby's father? Gone. Mrs. Brennan's smile sharpened. I see. Frank stepped forward. Thank you for the preserves, Mrs. Brennan. A dismissal. She took it, but her eyes promised trouble. When she left, Juliet sank into a chair. They'll talk, she whispered. They'll make you... Let them talk. But that night, Frank stood at his window longer than usual, jaw tight, hands clenched. Juliet watched from the shadows. She knew that look. She'd seen it before. The look of a man paying a price he hadn't expected. The council arrives. They came on a Thursday afternoon. 3 men in dark coats riding up Frank's lane like judges coming to deliver a sentence. Frank saw them from the barn, recognized Elder Morrison's gray stallion, the mayor's bay, Deacon Hutchins on his black mare. His stomach dropped. Inside the house, Juliet was mending one of his shirts by the stove. Charlotte slept in the wooden cradle Frank had carved. Peaceful, safe, not for long. Frank met them at the porch, didn't invite them in. Morrison dismounted first. Frank, we need to talk. About? About the girl. The mayor gestured toward the house. The one you took in. Frank's jaw tightened. Juliet. Juliet. Morrison said her name like it tasted bad. Frank, you're a widower. She's a young unmarried woman with a bastard child. You can't... Watch your mouth. The 3 men exchanged glances. Hutchins stepped forward. Frank, be reasonable. This is improper. People are talking. The girl needs to go. Behind him, Frank heard the front door open. Juliet stood in the doorway, Charlotte in her arms. Her face had gone white. She's not going anywhere, Frank said. Morrison's voice hardened. Frank, we're here as the council. This arrangement is indecent. You're harboring... I'm helping a mother and child who had nowhere else to go. On Thanksgiving Day, the mayor cut in. A young woman appears in your barn and suddenly she's living under your roof? Frank, think about how this looks. I am thinking about it. The church won't stand for this. The town won't. Then let them talk. Frank's voice went cold, flat, final. She stays. Both of them. Silence. Morrison's face flushed red. You're making a mistake. People will think the worst. People always do. Frank, we're done here. The three men stood frozen. Then Morrison turned, swung back into his saddle. The others followed. You'll regret this, Morrison said. Frank didn't answer, just watched them ride away. When the dust settled, he turned. Juliet stood on the porch, crying, Charlotte whimpering against her shoulder. I'm sorry. Her voice shattered. I'm so sorry. I'll go. I'll leave tonight. I won't. No. Frank, they'll ruin you. They'll... Juliet. He climbed the steps, stopped in front of her. This is my choice. You hear me? Mine. But I'm not sending you back out there. Not you. Not Charlotte. His voice gentled. I already lost one family. I'm not losing another. Juliet's tears came harder. She tried to speak, couldn't. Frank reached out, rested his hand on Charlotte's head. You're staying, he said quietly. That's the end of it. Inside the house, the stove crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, winter coming in hard, but on that porch, something held firm, something that wouldn't break. She shouldn't listen. But Charlotte slept peacefully beside her, and the floor didn't creak when she moved to the window. Frank stood with Thomas Reed from town. Their breath ghosted white in the cold. You're making it worse for yourself, Thomas said. The council's talking. The church ladies won't let it rest. I don't care what they'll never accept this, Frank. Thomas's voice sharpened. A young woman living under your roof, unmarried? You know how it looks. Silence. Then Frank's voice, quieter. I know. Juliet stepped back from the window. Her hands shook. They'll never accept this. She'd known. Of course she'd known. But hearing Frank admit it, she was ruining him. Juliet moved fast, gathered Charlotte's few things, the clothes Frank had given her, wrapped Charlotte in the blanket he'd bought in town last week. She kissed her daughter's forehead. Charlotte stirred but didn't wake. The note took 3 tries to write. Thank you. I'm sorry. I can't be the reason they turn on you. Juliet. She left it on the table, picked up Charlotte, crossed to the door. Her hand touched the knob. And Frank was standing there, lantern in one hand, eyes locked on hers. Where are you going? Juliet's voice broke. You know where. No. He set the lantern down, didn't move. You're not leaving. They'll destroy you because of me, Juliet. I heard you, on the porch. You said they'd never accept this. Frank's face changed. You heard half a conversation. I heard enough. He stepped closer. She backed against the door. You walk out that door, Juliet. His voice cracked, raw, desperate. You'll break what's left of me. Juliet stared at him, tears streaming down her face. I can't ruin you. You saved me. Frank reached for her hand, held it. Let me save you back. Something shattered inside her. 5 years of running, of hiding, of never trusting anyone. She fell into him. Not romance, just exhaustion, just breaking. Frank caught her, held her while she sobbed into his chest, Charlotte between them, safe. I've got you, he whispered. I'm not letting go. Juliet cried harder, because for the first time in her life, she believed it. For the first time, she chose to stay. Frank picked up the note from the table later, read it once, then fed it to the kitchen stove. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly, and this time Juliet nodded. This time she meant it. Sunday morning arrived cold and bright. Frank stood at the kitchen window, watching frost patterns melt in the sunlight. "We're going to church today." Juliet looked up from feeding Charlotte. Her face went pale. "Frank, I can't. They'll talk either way." He turned to face her. "Rather they see us standing together than hiding. They'll destroy you. Let them try." Juliet set the bottle down. Her hands trembled. "You don't know what it's like. The stares, the whispers, people who smile to your face then." Frank crossed to the table, held out his hand. "Then we'll face them together." She stared at his open palm, at the calluses and scars, at the steady certainty she'd never known before. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The church fell silent when they walked through the door. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Frank held Charlotte in the crook of his left arm. His right hand stayed locked with Juliet's. He didn't look down, didn't apologize, just walked to his usual pew and sat. Juliet sat beside him, spine rigid, eyes forward. Charlotte made a small sound. Frank adjusted her blanket. The whispers started, low, vicious, shameful. That poor man. What kind of woman? Juliet's hand tightened on his. Frank squeezed back. The sermon passed in a blur. Juliet heard nothing except the judgment radiating from every direction. Then it was over. People stood, filed toward the door. Most avoided looking at them, but one woman didn't. Mrs. Henderson, gray-haired, weathered, kind-eyed, approached their pew. She held a folded quilt. "Made this for the baby," she said quietly. "Nights are getting colder." Juliet's throat closed. She took the quilt with shaking hands. "Thank you." Mrs. Henderson nodded, touched Juliet's shoulder. Then she was gone. Another woman stepped forward, offered a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. Then another. "An invitation to supper next week." "Not everyone." Some turned away, lips pursed in disapproval. But enough. Enough to make Juliet believe she might survive this. That afternoon, Juliet found herself at Frank's kitchen window with scissors and thread. The old curtains, dusty, threadbare, came down easily. She'd found fabric in the storage room. Yellow calico, cheerful. Frank came in from the barn, stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Making it feel like home." She didn't look at him. Afraid he'd say no. Afraid she'd overstepped. "Good," Frank said quietly. "It should." The next day, Juliet brought wildflowers inside, dried stems in a mason jar. Frank said nothing, but she caught him staring at them that evening, something soft in his expression. Charlotte started smiling when Frank entered the room, would reach for him with tiny fists, make delighted sounds. Juliet watched them together, this broken man and her daughter, and felt something shift inside her chest. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. The workshop smelled like cedar and old wood smoke. Frank stood at his workbench, plane in hand, shaving curls from a piece of pine. He'd started the cradle 3 days ago. Small. Just right for Charlotte. Now it sat finished in the corner. Smooth rockers, carved edges, a heart notched into the headboard. But he wasn't done. Juliet found him there on a gray December afternoon. She stood in the doorway, Charlotte on her hip, watching him work. "What are you making?" Frank didn't look up, kept planing. "Another cradle. But Charlotte already has. This one's bigger." He ran his hand along the wood. "For later." Juliet went still. stared at the half-formed cradle, at the careful measurements, the clean joints, for later, for a future she hadn't dared imagine. Her throat closed. Tears came hot and fast. Frank finally looked up, saw her face. "Juliet, you think we'll still be here?" Her voice broke. "You think there's a later?" Frank set down the plane, crossed to her slowly. "I know there is." Juliet shook her head, crying harder now. "The town hates us. The council wants me gone. Everyone thinks—" "I don't care what they think. Frank, I want you here, Juliet. You and Charlotte, not just for now, for as long as you'll stay." She looked at him through tears. This man who'd taken them in when they had nothing, who'd stood against his whole town, who was building a future in his workshop while the world outside turned cold. "I want to stay," she whispered. Frank's expression softened. Then it settled. Charlotte reached for him. He took her gently, and the baby laughed, bright and clear in the quiet workshop. Juliet wiped her eyes, looked at the cradle again, for later, for the children who might come, for the family they were becoming. She'd been so certain she'd die alone that Thanksgiving morning. Now she stood in a warm workshop watching a man build hope out of pine and patience. "Thank you," she said. Frank met her gaze. "You're home, Juliet, really home." That night, snow began to fall. Not soft, not gentle, heavy, relentless. Frank stood at the kitchen window watching the wind pick up. The barn disappeared behind white curtains. The fences vanished. "Blizzard's coming," he said quietly. Juliet joined him at the window, Charlotte asleep upstairs. "How bad?" "Bad enough." He turned to her. "We'll be snowed in for days, maybe a week." She nodded. Didn't look afraid. Not anymore. Outside, the storm gathered strength. But inside, the house was warm. The stove crackled. Coffee steamed on the table. They were ready. Whatever came next, blizzard or town council or whispered accusations, they'd face it together. The wind howled. The snow deepened, and Frank realized something he hadn't felt in 5 long years. He felt alive. The wagon wheels hadn't even started turning when the crowd closed in. Frank had known it was coming. The whispers all through service, the sidelong glances, Elder Morrison standing at the church steps like a judge waiting to pass sentence. Now the old man blocked their path, 6 council members flanking him like soldiers. "Frank," Morrison's voice carried across the frozen churchyard. "We need to talk about this situation." Juliet went rigid beside him. Charlotte stirred in her arms, sensing the tension. Frank set the brake, didn't climb down. "Nothing to talk about, Elder." "It's improper." Morrison stepped closer. "A young woman, living under your roof, unmarried, unrelated. It's what?" Frank's voice dropped, dangerous, quiet. Morrison's jaw tightened. "Immoral." The word hung in the frozen air like a blade. Frank climbed down slow, deliberate. He reached for Charlotte and Juliet, hands shaking, passed her over. He held the baby against his chest, faced the crowd. "I lost a wife and child once." His voice didn't waver. "Buried them both the same winter. Thought I'd buried everything good in me with them." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable, listening. Then on Thanksgiving morning I found Juliet and Charlotte freezing in my barn. Another hour and they'd have been dead. He looked at Morrison, at the council, at every face watching. "I won't lose them again. They're my family now, by choice, not blood. And I thank God for the chance to protect them." Silence. Juliet was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Morrison opened his mouth, closed it. Then Mrs. Henderson stepped forward from the crowd, the baker's wife. She'd lost 2 children to fever years back. "Frank's right." Her voice cracked. What he's done is Christian. More Christian than any of us standing here judging him. Another voice. Amen to that. Mr. Tucker, the blacksmith, then his wife, but others turned away, shook their heads. Morrison's face went hard as stone. You're making a mistake, Frank. Maybe. Frank climbed back onto the wagon, settled Charlotte in his lap, offered his hand to Juliet. But it's mine to make. She took his hand, climbed up beside him. Frank released the brake, snapped the reins. The crowd parted, some with approval, some with disgust. Frank didn't look back. Beside him, Juliet sat straighter. Charlotte grabbed his thumb and held on tight. They rode home through the snow, heads high, together. Behind them, the church bells rang out across the valley. The balance had shifted. Juliet stood at the stove, flour dusting her sleeves, checking the turkey for the third time. Behind her, Frank peeled potatoes at the table, the same table where she'd eaten her first real meal in weeks. Everything had changed. Everything. Curtains hung in the windows now. Yellow ones Juliet had sewn by lamplight. Flowers sat in a jar on the sill, dried wildflowers from last summer that she couldn't bring herself to throw away. The house was alive again. Pa! Charlotte toddled across the floor, arms outstretched, grinning with 4 new teeth. Frank scooped her up, spun her once. She shrieked with delight. Juliet's chest tightened. A year ago, Charlotte had been blue-lipped and dying in her arms. Now she was calling Frank Pa and laughing like she'd never known fear. Almost ready? Frank asked, settling Charlotte on his hip. Almost. Juliet wiped her hands on her apron, tried to steady her breathing. Frank set Charlotte down, reached into his pocket. Got something for you. He placed a small wooden carving in Juliet's palm. A house. Simple, elegant, carved with the kind of care that took hours. Her initials were etched into the door, and Charlotte's, and Frank's. Frank. Her voice broke. Wanted you to have something permanent, he said quietly. Something that says you belong here. Juliet's tears came fast. She pressed the carving to her chest. I never thought I'd survive last winter. The words tumbled out. Never thought I'd find a home. Never thought. Frank stepped closer, cupped her face with one weathered hand. You didn't just find a home, Juliet. His voice was rough with emotion. You gave me one. She fell into his arms, let herself be held. Charlotte tugged at Frank's pant leg. Eat now? They laughed, pulled apart. Juliet carried the turkey to the table. Frank poured cider. Charlotte banged her spoon against her plate, impatient and alive. They sat together. 3 people who'd been broken and alone. Now a family. Frank said grace, thanked God for second chances, for cold barns and warm kitchens, for the girl who stumbled into his life when he'd given up on living.